Out-of-body experiences are among the most common paranormal anomaly known to man. William Buhlman is a leading expert in this phenomenon, and he makes no bones about telling us why we need to understand and even learn to self-initiate OBEs to obtain greater clarity about ourselves, the world around us, and the true nature of reality. Listen, let's get started. I have so many questions, honestly, and I have to tell you, I've been I suppose you could say, a passionate seeker of these subjects for many years, and I have to be honest with you. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm wondering if I was out of body. I'm not kidding you. I often think of some of the fantastical dreamscapes that I am in, and really wonder if that's part and parcel of the out of body state. So,
well, you can always test it by bringing more awareness into it by using a simple technique of awareness now. Just
right.
Demand awareness now.
Okay.
And see what happens.
So, are you saying now we're going off script immediately? I'm just kind of adding this as a pretext because I really think that in some cases I'm in an out of body state. So, are you saying sort of in a lucid dream state to make that command? At what point would I say awareness now?
Whenever you're most lucid part of the dream state. That's one of the things I teach in my workshops is how to take a lucid dream and upgrade it into a full OBE.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess what you're saying is that we can't necessarily assume by default that even if we're in the lucid state that we are out of body, it may be sort of an in-between state?
Well, the universe is a continuum of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what all these dimensions are, just consciousness.
Right. Agreed.
Everybody seems to be so fixated on three-dimensional form.
That's right.
Which is not, that has nothing to do with it, really. That's the end result of things. But consciousness is what creates the universe and everything in it. So when we go through all of us are going through multiple states within ourselves. Mm-hmm. And as such, let's just say we have the ability to shift and move our awareness. It's just a matter of learning how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay. Well, we kind of jumped right into this, but I think what I want to do is go back a little bit for the sake of the readers. I'm familiar fundamentally with what an OBE is, but just for the readers, if you might give us a working definition for what an out-of-body experience entails or what it is.
Okay, an OBE is a separation of consciousness from the body. And it differs, just to clarify something here, because there's confusion about it, and it differs from a near-death experience because a near-death experience involves the temporary, let's just say, death of the physical body, where an OBE does not. Mm-hmm. An OBE is just a separation of consciousness, but the body remains operational as normal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've talked a lot about the precursors, if you will, to an OBE. Let's say somebody isn't necessarily trying to self-initiate, but is having, or in the midst of having, a spontaneous OBE. What would some of those triggers or signals be? I know you talk about the vibrational state as one of the most common features. What other features might one look at?
Oh, well, there's many. One of them, probably the most shocking for people, is paralysis. Is a definite precursor and indicator that you are in the process of having an OBE. Hearing your name called, any kind of, let's just say, unusual sound or voices, being touched, being lifted, feeling yourself sinking, for instance, which many people do.
Yes, me included.
Anything that's basically out of what we would perceive as the norm. Any kind of energy event, energy movement, the presence of someone around you as you sleep, which many people get. Many people report there's somebody right next to them or even in their bed. That's a very common phenomenon during or at the onset and the after effect, actually, something out of the norm, essentially, any energy event that you would not perceive as being part of the norm could be an indication of an OBE, because our mind is interpreting things as, it doesn't mean it's a physical event, but our mind has trained to put labels on everything.
Absolutely, yes.
To frame everything
Mm-hmm.
along physical lines. So, the vibrational state is a wide term that almost can incorporate anything that's not considered normal during sleep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned one of the possible precursors as feeling the sense of a presence next to you, and I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, although they didn't necessarily allude to there being an OBE, but people who have had, I can think of a cousin actually that once told me he, while in bed, would feel the sense of somebody getting in bed with him. He was terrified, obviously, and he would never turn around to look, but he could literally feel the presence of somebody getting in the bed and holding on, not holding him per se, but getting next to him.
It's very, very common. Matter of fact, it happens during my workshops quite a bit. People report this. It's one of the most common phenomena, actually, but it just doesn't get reported as often.
Sure.
Remember, if you're perceiving something non-physical, what it means is that you've already shifted. Most people are not that sensitive to actually feel or sense that kind of phenomena unless they've already made some kind of internal shift within themselves.
That's interesting.
And in other words, they may be, in a sense, half in and out of their body, and that's
Sure.
why they're sensitive to this energy that's occurring around them. Where before, if they were in their full waking state, they wouldn't recognize it. See, because an OB is not an airy-fairy event.
No.
You can't tell the difference. And this is one thing I constantly repeat, and people have a difficult time with this because they've been trained to believe that it's some kind of you're on a cloud kind of event, and it's not. It's a very, very three-dimensional physical event. It feels physical. Of course, it's not. But you cannot tell the difference until you've had a few experiences and you realize, oh my God, my energy body is just as three-dimensional
Sure.
as my physical body.
Right,
Just vibrating at a different frequency.
Absolutely. And I've heard you talk about this before, and I find this intriguing where you've described this next level. We have many labels for it. Some call it the lower astral realm, which is, at a slightly finer vibratory rate, but still almost a replica of the physical. And I remember you describing several cases where people would be in familiar surroundings, maybe the room that they're actually in, but there might be one or two features that are different, and that would be the signal that, okay, this isn't exactly like the three-dimensional realm. There's something a little bit different here.
Yeah. Often, for instance, the room colors may be different.
That's interesting.
That's very common. But in the furniture, maybe just slightly different. I call it the parallel.
Sure.
It is the lower astral, so to speak, the denser astral, but I call it the parallel world because it's so similar.
So similar. Isn't that
And it exists in see, people think these dimensions are somewhere else.
Right.
And they don't, it's hard to describe to people that, no, everything is here and now.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I agree.
And because people can't, well, I don't see it. It doesn't matter. You don't see it because it's vibrating beyond your capability with your physical eyes. But it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right. Just like the wireless internet, correct?
Right. There's a lot of things. We have all kinds of energies occurring all around us. It doesn't mean, we can't see TV signals and phone signals and cell phone signals. We can't see ultraviolet light, and we can't see, many things. It doesn't mean they're not there.
That's right. And hearing as well. I mean, I believe our hearing capability is a tiny bit of the spectrum of sound where I believe it's between 20 and 20,000 hertz. But that's not to say there are many, many other vibrations. Yeah. Yeah.
As a species, we have some of the worst capabilities of perception.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, dogs and cats see and hear better than we do.
Absolutely.
But yet people take it for granted that they're observing the totality of reality when they're actually seeing just a tiny sliver of it.
That's right. Oh my gosh, well this is taking us in a whole other direction because I find just this aspect fascinating. Before we leave this and go into the healing aspects of OBE, William, I want to ask you this question because you bring up a really interesting point. You talk about the perception of energies around us at times, whether it's that being that's crawling into the bed with us or a perception of even what we call ghostly presence. Now, oftentimes I guess it would seem we're fully awake when we see these things. I'll give you an example. I've always been somewhat sensitive. I've always had phenomena in my life, nothing overt or loud, but enough to question. This is one of the reasons why I got into this field of research. I will tell you, lately I've been sensing a lot of what I would call manifestation of energy around me, peripherally. My husband and I both see it in our home, elsewhere. Now, one might say, and I'm obviously always wondering, what is that? Is it intelligent? What am I witnessing here? But what you're saying is that could be a signal because I'm perceiving something that isn't solid, three-dimensional as we know it. Could I maybe not be fully awake, even though I think I am?
Or you could be perceiving a wider spectrum of energy than you used to, let's just say, 10 years ago, because
Yes.
of the kind of work you do, and in other words, your awareness in general has expanded.
Yes.
I feel, and this is also reported by many people. Suddenly, people in this day and age, more and more people are having, for instance, psychic type experiences.
I know that. Yes.
And it's widespread.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what actually opens them up to these subjects, which is phenomenal. I mean, a lot of people have opened up in the last 20, 30 years just because of their personal psychic experiences that they just can't explain in any other way. Even little things like knowing when you just feel someone's about to call you and then suddenly you get the phone call.
That's right.
I mean, that's a psychic event.
Yeah. No question about it. Yeah.
And these things happen all the time to people. They just know when, let's say, a loved one may have gotten hurt or something has happened. Suddenly they know it, even before they get a call about it.
Of course. And I hear hundreds of cases of that.
Oh, yeah. It's everybody's having, it seems like everybody's having events like this on some scale.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole nother take on this, and it's not necessarily a different take, the possible impetus for why this is happening with increased numbers. I just interviewed a woman by the name of Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I don't know if you're familiar with her name. She's a paranormal researcher. And my question for her is, we know that we're dealing with cosmic influences. Our solar system is changing. Our magnetosphere is diminishing. Science has really confirmed that there's something going on with what may inevitably be a pole shift. Could it be that, and this goes into a whole other realm of thinking, but could it be that the diminishing of the protection, if you will, the shield almost between this planet and other planets and even other dimensions is thinning, thereby giving us the ability to perceive more?
I personally don't think it's a physical event. I think it's a non-physical. This is just my take on it. I think that a lot of people are just too obsessed with trying to find a physical result for everything.
Well, sure, yeah.
And I don't look at the world that way. I look at it like everything as above, so below. So that the physical world is the end result of a chain of events,
Mm-hmm.
which is, there's no doubt, from OBEs has proven that.
Mm-hmm.
So we are opening up to a wider spectrum of consciousness within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this opening, we're beginning to perceive more of the universe around us.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel. That's how the universe is unfolding.
Sure, yeah.
Anyway, that's my sense.
Sure. No, I understand. And yet I tend to wonder, at a minimum, we talk about the physical being a material realm, and then all of the other realms are non. I don't know whether there is actually anything that's material. This is just a more crystallized.
Oh, it's more energy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
science has proven, I mean, there's nothing really that's solid.
Right.
We perceive it. Just because we see it, and it doesn't mean... The bottom line is that everything is energy. It's just a matter of, are we vibrating at the same level and speed and density as what our surroundings, and then we perceive it as a solid. But once you increase your vibrational rate, which is exactly what happens during an OBE, suddenly the physical world is no longer real to you.
Right.
And what is real to you is a higher vibrational, let's just call it matter, energy. Mm-hmm. And suddenly that is real. But each one is actually equally real. Every dimension is equally real. It's just a matter of, I use a term all the time in workshops. It's perception is reality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that kind of explains it. However your perceptual vehicle is, you will perceive the equivalent in your surroundings.
I agree.
And so when people have an out-of-body experience, they've shifted their attention to a higher vibrational energy body within themselves, and they perceive a different reality and they experience a different reality. But that reality was always there.
Right. I understand.
They have made the shift. The universe hasn't.
Right. I agree with you.
That's the power of OBEs. It gives people that ability to prove this to themselves. It isn't some theory.
Yeah, yeah.
This is totally proof. That's what makes this subject, I think, so exciting too. Is that you can prove this to yourself.
That's right.
There's a lot of subjects that people investigate, but you can't. I mean, and a lot of them are fascinating, but they don't. You can't prove them, or let's just say it's very difficult to prove them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where this, just by learning simple techniques and taking the time, you can actually induce you can self-induce an out-of-body experience and prove this to yourself.
Right.
And that's powerful for people.
Of course it is. Well, you got me right perfectly into my next question that I was going to ask you, and that is, what are the benefits of self-initiated OBEs? And I think you started telling that story just now. That, I love, one of my favorite quotes is by Einstein, which is simply, the only source of knowledge is experience. The only source of knowledge is experience. And so if we can experience this finer vibratory realm, we'll call it, firsthand, we don't need to believe anymore. I'm not an advocate of believing in anything if you can experience it. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the great, let's face it, beliefs are one of the great millstone around the neck of all of humanity throughout time.
That's right.
Beliefs have created, or most beliefs end up being false if you go back through history.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been thousands and thousands of religions throughout history. And they've all faded away, and now we look at them and go, oh, that was a silly belief system. And it's only experience that gives us knowledge, self-knowledge.
Right. Yes.
So anytime we accept the belief, we're settling.
Right.
And we're limiting ourselves to this paradigm that is more than likely false. Mm-hmm. The same applies to science. I remember the famous quote by a scientist 500 years ago or something like that. No, I forget how long. No, it wasn't 500 years ago. I'm sorry. It's like 100 years ago, some scientist said that he thought that we had discovered it all.
Yeah.
And of course, we're still scratching the surface of what even reality is.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that, I think, is part and parcel of what we call the arrogance of science. We've discovered it all.
But the benefits of OBE are basically, I feel, the most powerful benefit is the fact that we have the ability to absolutely prove to ourselves that we continue, number one, what are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What's our purpose? These things, I feel, can be discovered through out-of-body exploration. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it takes us inward, closer to our true nature. And that's where the answers truly are. The answers are not found in the external world, the epidermis layer of reality. We have to go within.
Mm-hmm.
And OBEs is a powerful way to do that. And it still hasn't, I'm hoping that one day it'll become mainstream where people will really talk about it and acknowledge it for what its true capabilities are.
Right. What are you finding, the people that are attending your workshops? I'm sure you're keeping track of the impetus for what brought them there. Are you finding a trend in why people want to participate in self-initiated OBEs?
Self-knowledge. People, I think, go through a series of events, and I've been doing this for 20 years. I just come back from a 6-day workshop at Monroe. And people, first I think they go through a whole sequence of events where first they discover and they become disillusioned with beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people start out as a youth and you're indoctrinated into some religion. You don't have a choice. Your family, basically immerses you in a religion, and then you're told this is the truth. And then you adapt to it, and then people slowly wake up to the fact that, hey, this doesn't answer anything.
That's right, yeah.
This doesn't give me any solace or comfort, or it certainly doesn't provide any answers. So what good is it? So they start their search for the answers of their own reality. In other words, what am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going?
Right.
The big questions.
The big questions.
And along that path, they discover at some point that the only way to obtain these answers, after reading maybe 1,000 books, how people go from book to book, author to author, teacher to teacher, and then they find out that, hey, that's still not giving me the answers. I have to expand my experience to obtain the answers. And that's when suddenly I think that for many people, not all, as other people, there's other methods like meditation, but some people say, wow, this is the method. OBEs will definitely provide me with the experience I need to explore and discover the truth of the universe and myself. Mm-hmm. Personal verification, and get away from the belief systems completely. And that's what happens for people. They feel, man, I need this experience in order to know, because I'm sick of being immersed in a society just saturated with belief systems. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would say one thing that people that attend my workshops all have in common is that they all are totally disillusioned with beliefs, and they know it's a dead-end street.
Interesting.
And they say, heck, whatever it takes, I need to initiate some kind of, let's just say, spiritual experience that will give me the personal answers, personal verification that I require. Mm-hmm. So I know, and that's really the core of it.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, let's now talk about some of the benefits that could perhaps be brought back to the physical realm based on self-initiated out-of-body experiences, William. What I wanted to talk about is the healing. You've talked about in several interviews that I've heard, people who have literally been physically healed. I don't know how prevalent this is, but I really want to get into that as a benefit. Can you elaborate just in general on, I know that there were a couple of anecdotes that you had shared of people who had been healed. And
I can use one from my personal life, actually.
Okay.
I know there's reasons that things develop. As I said, as above, so below, so that all illness comes from within and then manifests without. But March of last year, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Oh my! Wow.
The lymph nodes and tonsils. So the bottom line is, I started immediately to send healing energy to myself, and as of 4 months ago, I'm completely clear. Now I went through some traditional medical. I'm not saying I did this all myself, which of course I'm not stating that. healing energy to myself during OBEs.
Isn't that powerful? Isn't that powerful? I certainly didn't expect you to give me that as the anecdote, and yet I know that there's something powerful going on here. Well, keep doing that.
There's no doubt in my mind that had a massive impact, because it's about energy, shifting energy.
Right.
Right. But I get reports from people that all the time on different levels about some kind of healing that has occurred, either to themselves or others.
Right.
Because remember that when you leave your body, you're entering the substructure of matter. You're entering the energy. It's like the energy foundation, let's say. I think people can relate to this. It's the energy foundation, and as such, you can, let's just say, make changes energetically to this foundation. And since everything starts from within and moves without into the denser worlds, if you adjust the inner, then there's an effect on the outer.
That's right.
So, but during an OBE, you're directly, let's just say, interacting with it, because you're at the same vibrational level.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's a much more powerful experience.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've talked about, the universe being thought responsive in any case.
Yeah.
But when we're in the out-of-body state, starting, I suppose, with the lower astral realms into the mid and higher, if there are such things, and into the causal, etc., these thoughts become even more immediately materialized, for lack of a better word. So, I would imagine that if you're even having thoughts, healing now, to use your approach,
now that you meant, that's exactly what I did. I given short, powerful affirmations, and that's exactly what I did during my OBEs, is demand healing now.
Healing now.
And it's not some complex system. It's just a matter of focusing your intention, and because intention is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And from an energetic standpoint, healing now, if you do this when you're out of the body, it has tremendous power.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can feel it. It's just amazing. It's just rushes of energy flowing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Did you have any sort of perceptions as you were making these commands in the out-of-body state? For instance, were you able to, one of my questions for you was can one possibly find the root of illness in the out-of-body state? Let's say you have a malady of some sort and you don't necessarily know where it's coming from or what it is. Can we get clarity in the out-of-body state in order to, in a sense, diagnose ourselves?
It depends on the state of consciousness of the individual. I mean, really, this applies to all things, but that is especially true. Some people can obtain what I feel is sometimes most important. They can obtain the reason for the malady, because there's a reason for everything, and they can find out get clarity on, well, why have you given yourself this challenge,
mm-hmm.
essentially,
mm-hmm.
and then you can start to. But it depends on the individual. We're talking about a wide spectrum here of whether people are aware of all these energy events that are occurring, and most people, unless they're really experienced, I think, and they remain calm and collected during an OBE, they're not going to get that kind of detail necessarily.
Yeah, sure.
So
right.
I want to make it clear, this is not something that necessarily the average person would necessarily have under their control during their first OBE.
Right.
Because the whole thing is many times it's just flat out shocking at the beginning.
Yes, I know.
I mean, the event for many people, it only lasts 20 seconds or less.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes much less than that, because they're not used to it, and it just, it's like, my God, what was that kind of thing?
Oh, sure.
The last thing they have, it took me, my God, 10 years to gain some semblance of what I would see would be control.
Really?
I'm just being blunt about it. I mean, it takes time to, at least for me it did.
10 years.
It took about 10 years of experiences before I thought I was becoming... Now, remember, there was no guidance back in the 70s.
No.
There was nothing. I was trial and error. Now, I think the learning curve is better for people because there is some assistance.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 70s, I learned everything from trial and error.
Right.
And it was a long learning curve.
Right. Now, what was the height of Robert Monroe's work? That was somewhat in that area, yes? Or was it early 80s?
Well, Bob Monroe essentially stayed within his compound on the mountain and wrote 3 books about his experiences, and then developed HemiSync and created the Monroe Institute. But he was not, if the question, he was not out and about necessarily doing that many public appearances per se and teaching the process of out-of-body exploration. He was a natural. He was having events spontaneously.
Yeah, I know.
In the beginning, he didn't even know what it was, and he went to a doctor because he thought he was losing it.
Oh, my goodness.
So there's different kinds of people have different kinds of experiences. So it's hard to my experiences are different than his just because I did self-initiate. I wasn't just instantaneously popping out of my body, and then I had to learn what was happening. I from the beginning, I started self-directing, self-initiating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, there's still a long learning curve for a lot of us who do this, but it was different for different people. For instance, some people will spend more time in different energy dimensions than others, depending on your own personal development, etc. So, it's hard to compare one person to another or to even to discuss the reality of someone else.
Right, because it's a very subjective experience.
Well, it's all based on each individual state of consciousness. I use the analogy that 10 people could have an out-of-body experience, and they're all going to experience 10 different things.
Mm-hmm.
In theory. Now, my point is, it's not that they're making it. They're not making up. I'm saying it's that many states of consciousness, and they will all be perceiving from their own perceptual capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I use that as an analogy because I want to get. When I do my classes, I want people to realize that they're not talking. That we're not talking about some kind of. People think of the other dimensions as being just like the physical, and they're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about where people go or what they experience is based on their own vibrational level.
Right.
So the only way 2 people would experience the exact same reality is if they were exactly in sync with one another vibrationally.
Can one try to achieve that? Let's say we wanted to try to do self-initiated OBEs as a group or with one other person. Is there anything that one might be able to do to synchronize those vibrations to have a shared experience?
You create a target, and you each go to the target. And that's the way to do something like that. I mean, you would try your very best to at least synchronize the time and the place and the... for instance, there's a massive, beautiful target at the Monroe. There's a massive, beautiful crystal that stands like 7, 8 feet high.
Wow.
At the Monroe Institute, and that is a target that I use in my workshop.
Uh-huh.
That people can all go to at the same time. Stuff like that. Now that gives you a better chance of being able to perceive other, let's just say, states of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
and yet you may not be seeing the crystal in the same way.
No, more than likely, no one, you could have, God, my God, I doubt if anyone would see it exactly the same way.
Yeah. Well, they argue that some say that even we here in the physical plane, you have an apple in the middle of the table and you assume that the person sitting across from you is seeing the same features of the apple, the same shade of red. How do we know that? Maybe not. It's still somewhat of a subjective experience.
Oh, it is. It is.
Very interesting. You also talked about expectant mothers who have come to you. I don't know, what number, how many have told you this, but who have had communications in the OBE state with their unborn children. I think that's fascinating and yet not surprising to me, because I've heard similar such stories, not necessarily within the context of OBEs, but certainly a communication taking place between expectant mother and unborn child. I'm wondering, William, could we take that to the next level? Let's say an expectant mother is self-initiating OBEs to be able to connect with their unborn child. Could that potentially influence the health of that child when they're born?
In theory, yes. This type of communication is actually quite common. And of course, you don't have to have OBEs even to have some form of communication between a mother and let's just say a soul about to enter the physical world, because that's what a birth really is. Mm-hmm. The body, the body of the baby is just a vehicle of consciousness. So yes, in theory. Now I have no personal context of that particular subject where you're trying to influence. I don't know that, but I do know, and I have received a lot of, let's just say, information from people over the years, from mothers who have communicated on a very, very face-to-face level. Mm-hmm. In other words, what was interesting, to cut to the chase here, the baby wasn't a baby. Everybody thinks, oh, that's a baby. No, it's not. And that's what I found fascinating, was the fact that mothers would communicate with their child, but when they were out of body, it wasn't a child.
Was there an average?
An adult soul getting ready to incarnate into the form of a baby. And it's, everybody thinks that the outer vehicle is what they are.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing could be further than the truth. It's like, and that's what I found mind-blowing for people, because it reinforced to me, and I've had dozens of these kind of reports, that our perception of reality is skewed to begin with. Because as a society, we're totally obsessed with the outer form of everything.
That's right.
I mean, aren't we? I mean, it's so true.
Yes.
And even when every baby out there is not a baby, it's an adult soul. In other words, it's just taken on the form of the baby to reincarnate. But that baby may have been here 100 times before.
Right. Well,
we don't think of it that way. And anyway, that's the kind of reports I had, where they not only were they the mother and the child, which of course is an adult, they knew one another, but often they would get some insight on the connection, which was really mind-blowing. In other words, you imagine you find out your baby is, not exactly, you've known your baby in the past.
Sure.
And it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about the ramifications of that. It gives you a much wider perspective of what reality really is.
Sure. And I think at a minimum it would certainly influence the way you might rear your child, because it could very well be that the child is wiser than you, and I tend to think we've got a lot of that going on these days.
Yes. And it does. It gives you a different perception. Everything is consciousness. The whole purpose of the physical universe is evolution of soul, of consciousness. That's how I look at it. Mm-hmm. And I write about this in my new book quite extensively.
What is your new book?
It'll be coming out around August or so.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that on the back end. That's good to know.
But this subject I cover extensively, because it's all about life experience and what happens, and I go into the process that we're dealing with. All of us are in the middle of this evolutionary, just say this evolutionary training ground, where all of us are evolving through form and matter. But
right.
that's one of the things I know I learned through OBEs. I would have never known this.
Well, that was another question I wanted to ask, is in terms of the reasons why people want to seek out this process. We know that one of the perennial curiosities of life is, what is the afterlife like? And, again, this indoctrination into, being so identified with the physical form, I think has put a sense of utter fear into the minds of people, thinking that if the physical is all there is, and after that there's nothing. And I would imagine that there's got to be a fair amount of people that want some reconciliation of what's really going on here, and that's why they want to try to self-initiate OBEs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a big reason why people want a confirmation that they do continue, not just this theoretical thing. And of course, OBEs gives you that. People that have had OBEs, conscious OBEs, do not fear death. Same thing with near-death experiencers. They don't. There's nothing to fear. You continue.
Right.
It's that clear. I don't fear it. I mean, it's a show. It's a passing event.
Yes.
But it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to know it.
Yeah.
And that's what OBEs gives you, is that knowing.
Right. Getting back to that first person experience. That's right.
Yes. And it's a real opening for people, because you're right. Fear of death is one of the great cultural things that still hang over us. Worldwide, I mean, people are terrified. And it's unfortunate, because what is it basically? It's a lack of just knowledge.
I would agree.
And we have to expand our capacity to obtain knowledge and answers. So it's up to us to find the answer to that. And that's through personal experience, again, like always.
Right. Well, so many thoughts are running through my mind on that subject alone. I interviewed Dr. Bruce Goldberg, whom I believe you know. He spoke so highly of you several months ago. And the focus of my interview with him is to talk about OBEs to help the grief process. And, very similar connotations, the sense of not just fear, but absolute bereavement at the loss of a loved one. And his idea is to use OBEs as a catalyst to get confirmation that our loved ones are indeed just as real and alive as they ever were, maybe more so. But also, I think the point I wanted to make is, not only if we go into death with a fear of death, do we perhaps, without having previous knowledge through, for instance, OBEs, can that fear even be carried into the afterlife, and the fear continuing, as Dr. Goldberg says, on the lower astral realms? So I would imagine that, I'm kind of asking the question and maybe supposing the answer on my own, but if someone is trained and adept at being in that out-of-body state as almost a preparatory way of acclimating to the inevitable, perhaps the transition into the afterlife and maybe even subsequent levels that one might go through would be easier, because they're not carrying that fear into the afterlife?
Absolutely. And also, it's a powerful launch point for people. Those that can, matter of fact, in Secret of the Soul, I have an entire chapter about this. It's a new vision of death and dying, that people can essentially elevate their afterlife experience and move to higher realities at the transition of death. Because what is death but the transition of consciousness from one energy body to another? That's what death is. And if so, then why can't we, through our own self-directed actions, for instance, when someone is about to die, why can't we do what the Tibetan monks have done for hundreds and hundreds of years, and chant essentially, and meditate on the fact of
Yes.
spiritual essence now. Why can't we begin to increase our vibratory rate and focus our attention, which of course is always very powerful, it creates reality.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we also influence the whole process of transition, which we can? This is the core. As a matter of fact, this is nothing new here. This is exactly what's written in the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
When a monk is dying, the fellow monks surround them and they chant, "Go to the clear light of the void." And they chant it for sometimes, if they need to, days. What they're saying essentially is, go beyond form-based realities of the astral plane.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the clear light of the void beyond form. In other words, go to the higher realities. So in a more modern context, I just teach a very simple philosophy of higher self now,
mm-hmm.
as you're about to make your transition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to the best of your ability, try to self-direct your transition so you experience a more enlightened transition, and you go to let's just say, the highest possible reality you're capable of experiencing.
Uh-huh.
It's all about states of consciousness.
Right.
So at least make the effort. And of course, fear is one of the most negative and dense emotions. So if you go to your death lingering in fear, you are really, I feel, hampering and diminishing your journey of consciousness.
It's
a very severe. It's like, oh my God, it's like putting a ball and chain around your neck.
Yeah, yeah, and yet
you're more likely, I feel, just common sense says, you're more likely to end up in, let's just call it, a denser dimension. And of course, that's exactly the same teaching of the Tibetan monks and other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
You try to go beyond.
Interesting.
You want to purge as many negative energy, emotions as you possibly can anyway. But fear is definitely one of the most negative ones that we could possibly hold. And in our Western culture, most people, unfortunately, we're talking billions of people, they go to death, the process of death, in generally fearful.
Absolutely. And
it's unnecessary.
Yeah, and wouldn't that possibly explain, I mean, we, all of us have looked into the possible reason for haunting activity, ghostly activity, and many have agreed possibly that these are souls who are still in a very dense level of existence, albeit just outside of the spectrum of the physical, and that's why we're able to perceive this energy, and it's very common. And it would make so much sense to me, William, that this is the result of a fear consensus of those that have crossed over. So there's a lot of them. There's billions of them, probably.
Yes, there is. And they're just a reflection of their state of consciousness they held in the physical life.
Wow.
And they've limited their own progression, let's say, and they've ended up in the lower parallel worlds that are exactly what they talk about as ghosts, because they're clinging to three-dimensional shapes and forms.
That's right.
They're clinging to the density of matter, and that nothing could be more negative than that, because you're actually putting the total brakes on all spiritual development.
Mm-hmm.
You're clinging to the outer epidermis of the universe instead of moving inward to the more thought-responsive, more magnificent realities that exist for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's fear, it's lack of information, it's just ignorance of self and their own capabilities hold people in these denser realities.
Yeah.
Well, and it's unnecessary, but there's millions of them.
The denser realities are overcrowded. I would totally agree.
I have found that, and I write about it in my new book.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can't wait to get my hands on that. Let me ask you a question. We're talking. It's interesting how this conversation is kind of just timing perfect with the next question I want to ask. We're talking about the various levels, if you will. I try not to over-concern myself with hierarchy, because I think it's more spherical, perhaps. But since we're looking at, lower astral, possibly mid, upper, and above, causal and above, getting back to the issue of healing, would it be safe to say that if we wanted to do self-initiated OBEs for the purposes of healing, whether it be physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, that we would need to strive to catapult ourselves beyond at least the lower astral levels, and try to get to those even more thought responsive levels in order to have a certain result? Perhaps we can go back to your situation in your healing. Do you understand the question? In other words, wouldn't it seem logical that we would...
The volume is diminishing.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but it's not as loud.
Oh, okay. I'll try to stay closer to the phone. Did you understand the question? In other words, do we, in trying to heal ourselves here in the physical, in the out-of-body state, wouldn't it make sense to try to get to those finer vibratory realms beyond the lower and even mid-astral?
That's the whole goal. This is why I teach in my workshop the whole concept of higher self now during that point of transition, that we elevate ourselves in consciousness and vibration as much as we can beyond the dense astral plane. The key is to basically to escape the astral plane.
Totally.
Most people, that's why the Buddhists call it the wheel. I mean, because they're stuck. They're just moving back and forth. The shift between the astral and the physical is a very tiny shift in relationship to the totality of the universe. In other words, people are just they're like being, for lack of a better word, they're being recycled.
Right.
They die, they go to the lower astral plane, they think they're in some kind of consensus religious heaven. It's a little better than the physical, so they're okay with it. They spend some time there, then they come back for more training. And they continue to do this over and over again. And they never even get an inkling of, well, maybe I can propel myself, my awareness beyond this, let's just say, outer level, which is what the physical and the astral is. And of course, that's what I teach in my workshops, at different ways to project your consciousness. And if you can project, let me look at it a different way. If you can project your consciousness from your physical body to your astral body, which is what astral projection is, that's a huge step inward. Why can't you do that from your physical body all the way to your mental or soul body at the point of transition? And there's no reason you can't. It's only it's only us that limits us.
Sure.
So if we receive the proper training and do if we make that our intention, which intention creates reality, and we focus on that in the moment of death, instead of just laying there in fear and say, higher self now, spiritual essence now, and use that as a self-directing tool, at least there's a chance that we can elevate our, let's just say, vibrational experience. And that I think is so important in this day and age.
Yeah.
And this is what is not taught, unfortunately, in religion.
Of course not. And
this is what's needed.
Of course it is. Well, I think
it's needed so badly. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, there may be a reason for that, William, but that would be a whole nother discussion.
Yes, it would be.
I'm tempted to go there, but maybe we can have an offline about that one day. What was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Oh, so this is an interesting point. Now, we're getting back to not necessarily the final transition, but OBEs in general. It just occurred to me, in the early days, if you will, of this subject matter sort of becoming burgeoning, I think it's somewhat burgeoning now, we would hear the term astral travel. Astral travel. And it just occurred to me, you do not hear that as much as you hear OBE. And you said something that's a little bit of a clue to me. Astral travel assumes that you are traveling to the astral realms and not beyond that. Is there anything to that? And, do you know where I'm going with this? That now OBEs covers the gamut, where, you might go to the astral realm, or you might go to the causal realm, or the mental realm, or purely to the soul level. Is there something to that? Could that be?
Yes, I think there is, because there is, I think in the last, especially the last 30 years, there has been, let's just say, a relatively rapid elevation of consciousness occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, it's not necessarily a collective. It's more of an individual. Each individual is on their own path,
Mm-hmm.
and as such, a lot of people are. When I use the word, that's why I nowadays use the word out of body, because I don't want to be pigeonholed
Mm-hmm.
as astral projection, because it is so much more than that. That's only one dimension of many. So to think that that's the only place you're going to end up is just silliness.
Right.
And it's not accurate.
Yeah.
It depends on your own personal evolution. When people do my techniques, they can end up anywhere, depending on their own state of consciousness. That's really as wide as it is. They could be self-realized, actually, in theory, if they were already close to that in vibration.
Right.
They could have the ultimate experience.
Right. Right.
There's nothing to stop that except the individual themselves.
Sure.
The last thing I want to do is to put limits on somebody's personal experience. My whole goal is to expand that. That's why in my workshops, we don't really talk about astral projection at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use the term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't hear it as much.
No, it's slowly disappearing. Because it also has an occult connotation to it from the old school, from like 50 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so limited, the concept.
Right. It is, absolutely.
But out of body is also limited in its own right, because actually an out-of-body experience is actually an inner experience. We're transferring our consciousness to a finer, less dense, higher vibratory. So in reality, we're actually moving inward.
Inner body experience. In the body experience.
But it's a term is called on, whether it was created by Moody or someone, but it's called on and it's become culturally acceptable.
Right. And again, labels we tend to attach so much to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. We're nearing the end of the interview, and I think it's kind of gone in a different direction, but equally fascinating, William, equally. For someone that is really looking, and I have talked to quite a few people that are very much interested in your workshops and interested in learning how to self-initiate OBEs, what would you say, how often would you suggest that they practice the process?
You have to do it. It's every day.
Every day.
So the only way to be effective is to have a daily program. It's just like meditation.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to do it every day, because you have to begin to, the old saying, it takes 21 days to create a habit. Well, we have to begin to retrain, to recondition our subconscious mind to accept this as a new reality. And you have to do that through daily a process. So what I strongly recommend, as anyone who attends, I hammer this, that you must do this daily. And it has to be, now it's easy to fit this into your lifestyle, because a lot of these techniques only take 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of every time you're about to take a nap or before you go to bed, that's the time to start your OBE technique.
Okay.
It's not about, you don't have to go into a cave anymore and meditate for years. That doesn't work in our modern society anyway. But it's important to create your own daily program,
mm-hmm.
some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, for instance, if some people have an opportunity in the middle of the day to take a nap, then right before you take your nap, as you're drifting off, you hold your intention. For instance, something as simple as just an affirmation can be effective. Like, now I am out of body. And you hold that as your last conscious thought as your body drifts asleep. That's the technique in and of itself. This isn't about learning some kind of, complicated system. I try to keep things simple and direct. Mm-hmm. Because I know from experience that people won't do it unless it's simple and direct.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I agree.
And the repetition part is very, very important.
So you would continue to repeat, now I'm out of body, over and over, almost like a mantra?
Yes, exactly. Like a mantra, and hold it as your last conscious thought.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's just one. I have like 100 different techniques.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the easiest that people use and have results from it.
Sure.
Just
Wow.
by, and I get a lot of reports of this, just by reading a book on the topic as you're falling asleep and saturating your mind with this, let's just say, the reality of exploring beyond your physical limits. People have OBEs from that.
Sure. I can see that. Well, I have to tell you, when I was deep in a certain study, I'm an avid Seth. I don't know if you're familiar with the Seth material by Jane Roberts.
Very, very familiar with it.
Oh, fantastic. And I'd have to say he was one of my that material was one of my earliest teachers.
Jane Roberts, sure.
It was amazing. And I have to tell you, I was so immersed in this material. Very often I would carry the information into the dream state, where I frankly felt like I was communicating directly with Seth and getting concepts beyond what he was explaining in the material. So there was definitely, because I was saturating my mind with this information, it was almost acting as a trigger for me to enter into the depths of that material in the dream state.
Yes, that's exactly how it works.
Yeah. Oh, I've had firsthand experience with that, so I agree.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Very powerful.
Very powerful to stay saturated in the topic.
Yeah, and that works conversely as well. We must warn ourselves that if we saturate ourselves with TV just before we go to bed, guess what's going to happen?
Right, it's the worst thing you can do.
I know.
Is watch one of these dumb reality shows and then go to bed.
I don't touch it, thank goodness.
And then people wonder why they had a bad dream or something.
Right.
No wonder.
Yeah.
You have to always, people forget that sleep is an altered state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take a nap, you're entering an altered state of consciousness. It's a great time to do your inner work.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
That's when things happen. That's when people have out-of-body experiences. You don't remain conscious of your body and have an out-of-body experience. Very few people have that capability. Most people, you have to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that by falling asleep.
That's
and
right.
Then suddenly there's a shift of consciousness, and there you are, standing next to your body. I mean, that's how it works for people.
Sure. Yeah. It is. Sleep is definitely an altered state of consciousness, and I do agree that dream time and the time that we are in that altered state is when we're most influenced and can be influence other situations. So, William, tell me about your book. When is it coming out, and a little bit about that?
Well, I'm hoping it will be out by the end of summer.
Uh-huh.
The tentative title is Adventures Beyond the Body, Book 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the afterlife. I focus primarily on the afterlife and what it looks like, what these realities are actually like. There's no theory. I mean, this is real experiences that myself and others have had, detailed into what these I call them consensus reality heavens, because every reality is created by thought. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately now the word heaven has become so, and there's millions of these realities, and people consider them, when you're there, that's their heaven. Mm-hmm. There's no death, there's no hunger, it's much better, for many people it's a much better place than the physical world. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's no crime, what I mean, but the point is you're still carrying all your stuff with you. Mm-hmm. So people still carry their limits with them, and people essentially, once people connect with a group reality, they adapt to the norms of that reality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what amazed me. It's not angels with wings and stuff like that going on. It's just like here. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that many people find probably the most shocking.
Right.
Because I don't know, they've been told all this stuff about what's going to happen. And unfortunately, I wish some of it was true because it does sound very nice. But there has been no objective reporting from anybody credible that talks about this. People do not see Jesus, even though they may believe in Jesus, unless you're at the vibrational evolutionary level of Jesus. So here there's a lot of Christian heavens, for instance, but Jesus isn't there.
Right.
But they still continue their belief systems.
Right.
So the belief systems continue even in the afterlife. That's one of the most shocking things I've found.
Yeah, at least for a period of time.
A lot of the things that, we carry this stuff with us. People carry their issues. If you have fears, you still have fears. We're not purged and become purified, as many people would like to believe.
Right. There's a saying that says, death is no cure for ignorance.
Exactly. And so there's realities where people, if you resonate with a group of people that are, let's for lack of a better word, totally ignorant of themselves and reality, and you join that group, you will be limited to the consensus reality that they have created. Whatever that may be.
Right.
And the diversity is unlimited. That's why I state that there's millions and millions of these heavens.
Yeah. So you really go into a lot of detail in this upcoming book on that. I think people will absolutely love that. Give us your website or websites.
It's astralinfo.org, www.astralinfo.org.
Okay. And do you have any upcoming workshops?
I will be doing one this August. I just completed one at Monroe Institute in Virginia, and I'll be doing one in November. I'll be I travel. It'll be on my website because I travel to different. My books are in 12 languages. Well, I go to many different countries doing workshops. I'll be in Japan, France, and Italy next year.
Oh, that's great. Well, I hope we can maybe get you to this part of the world, all the way in Massachusetts one of these days. It'd be great to have you.
Yeah, in the United States, I generally, I'm really comfortable at the Monroe Institute, so I do 4 of those a year. They're 6 days long. They're very, very extensive, and it's the best place to practice this because everybody's in their own check unit.
Right. That sounds great. Well, we'll definitely look that up. William Buhlman is the author of Adventures Beyond the Body and The Secret of the Soul. You can learn more about his groundbreaking work on OBEs at astralinfo.org. Thanks for listening to Higher Journeys.